Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday is UFC 284 in Perth, Australia, and in the main event we have Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski for the undisputed lightweight title, and this is going to be my full breakdown and prediction. I've already done a bunch of UFC 284 content. I will link my entire UFC 284 playlist down in the description if you want to go check out any of those videos after this. But I also have a bunch more UFC 284 prediction videos coming, as well as I'll be doing a live watch along Saturday night for UFC 284. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of that. So Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski is getting far too little hype and is also getting far too little promotion from the UFC and Dana White. And I think it's because Dana White's far too focused on another organization that I will not mention in this video. But this is a massive fight. On paper, this is one of the best fights the UFC can make. You have Islam Makhachev, pound for pound number 2. You have Alexander Volkanovski, pound for pound number 1. You have 11 fight win streak Islam Makhachev versus 22 fight win streak Alexander Volkanovski. And this is a true super fight. The word super fight has been thrown around loosely for probably the last 5 years by MMA fans. This is an actual super fight. You have a true undisputed UFC lightweight champion in Islam Makhachev taking on the undisputed featherweight champion in Alexander Volkanovski. And this fight is so compelling because Islam Makhachev, even though he just won the belt, he's looked so dominant for so many years. And Alexander Volkanovski has been reigning over the featherweight division for the past few years. He's so well-rounded. And if there's anyone to be able to go up and take a second belt and take it off a guy the level of Islam Makhachev, it's Alexander Volkanovski. There is far too many people counting out Alexander Volkanovski in this fight. And if you think that Volkanovski has no chance to defeat Islam Makhachev, I think that's absolutely ludicrous. I'm going to get to my prediction later in this video, but Alexander Volkanovski can definitely defeat Islam Makhachev. And, just he's so well-rounded. Alexander Volkanovski, there's no weaknesses. You look at his striking is so good. His grappling is good. His submission defense is good. His cardio is amazing. His fight IQ, he has decent power. He has a good variety of shots. And then you have Islam Makhachev, who he's slowly becoming more and more well-rounded, but his grappling is so good. We know what Islam Makhachev wants to do. He wants to take you down and beat you up. But what's also interesting about this fight is both guys, every time out, they look so improved. Volkanovski, even from the Korean Zombie fight to the third Max Holloway fight, or if you want to say the second Max Holloway fight to the third Max Holloway fight, Volkanovski looked like he leveled up multiple times. And Islam Makhachev, he's been so dominant for the past few years. He hasn't fought the best competition. We're going to talk about his resume here in a second. But what he did to Charles Oliveira was so impressive. And he's slowly developing his game. His striking has looked so much better in his last few fights, or at least his last fight against Charles Oliveira. And I can't wait to see how this fight plays out. And it means more than just the double champion for Alexander Volkanovski. Because in this fight, if he goes out there and beats a guy the caliber of Islam Makhachev, and people believe that Islam Makhachev will probably go on to become one of the greatest lightweight champions of all time, if he goes out there and beats him, this cements, he's already in the discussion for the GOAT of the 145-pound division. I would already put him as the number 1 GOAT of the featherweight division. You can make a discussion for Jose Aldo if you include his WEC run. But this would cement Alexander Volkanovski up there with GSP, up there with Anderson Silva. And I think a win like this and to become a simultaneous double champ would just be historic for Alexander Volkanovski. And also it's a win-win for Alexander Volkanovski. Because if he goes out there and loses his fight, he went up a weight class, lost to a champion that everyone thought was going to win. And, he can go back down to featherweight. He will fight the winner of Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett, which is the co-main event of UFC 284. And he'll defend his featherweight belt. And it won't really mean anything. He tried, he failed. But for Islam Makhachev, if he loses the belt to Alexander Volkanovski, he just won the belt. So he's not going to get an immediate rematch unless it's controversial. and then people will kind of diminish Alexander Volkanovski to diminish Islam Makhachev. They'll say, oh, you lost to a guy who's much smaller than you because Volkanovski came from the featherweight weight class. So for Islam Makhachev, don't get me wrong, if he wins this fight, he's going to be ranked pound for pound number 1. But if he loses, he's going to be in a tricky spot within the lightweight division. I mean, Volkanovski says if he wins the belt, he wants to try to defend in both weight classes. We've heard that time and time again. Usually it doesn't happen. If anybody's going to do it, it'll probably be Alexander Volkanovski. But this is going to just be a super interesting fight for so many layers, because depending on who wins this fight and how the lightweight division goes after this, I'm going to be very curious to see how it plays out. And both guys are just such elite fighters. Both guys have such elite skill sets. And I just think that this fight, on paper, skill for skill, is one of the most high-level matchups we've seen in the past few years within the UFC. So if you look at the tail of the tape for this fight, you have Islam Makhachev is 22-1. Alexander Volkanovski is 25-1. Islam is the lightweight champion. Volkanovski is the featherweight champion. Islam is 31. Volkanovski's 34. Islam is 5'10". Volkanovski's 5'6". Islam has a 70.5-inch reach, and Volkanovski has a 71.5-inch reach. So a 4-inch height advantage for Islam Makhachev and a 1-inch reach advantage for Alexander Volkanovski, which actually surprised me. So if you look at Alexander Volkanovski, of his 25 pro MMA wins, 12 by knockout, 3 by submission, and 10 by decision. Of his one loss, he's been knocked out, but that fight was so long ago. It was when he just started in MMA. This was all the way back in May of 2013, so it really doesn't matter. Alexander Volkanovski is undefeated in the UFC. So his last fight was at UFC 276, July of 2022, and he just put on a masterclass in the trilogy fight against Max Holloway. This fight really wasn't competitive at all. Volkanovski, after that first round on, and even in the first round, Volkanovski was looking very good, landing good, powerful shots on Max Holloway. But after that first round, the fight wasn't even competitive. Volkanovski was just busting Max Holloway up time and time again. Great combinations. And it was such a dominant performance. And it just put the closure to the fans who were saying Max Holloway's still the featherweight champion, which I personally didn't believe. But Volkanovski put on a masterclass performance. And what made it so impressive is we know how good Max Holloway is. And for Volkanovski to beat him that badly was just so impressive. The fight before that was at UFC 273, April of last year. This was against the Korean Zombie Chan Sung Jung. To be honest, the Korean Zombie shouldn't have been in there with Alexander Volkanovski. Max Holloway needed more time, so therefore they just put the Korean Zombie in there. And Alexander Volkanovski beat the brakes off him. Could have been stopped by the corner, could have been stopped by the ref, could have been stopped by the doctor earlier. Ultimately, it's a 4th round TKO. The fight before that was at UFC 266 back in September of 2021 against Brian Ortega. People think, this was one of the best fights of all time. People were saying it was the fight of the year 2021. This was a one-sided beatdown by Alexander Volkanovski with 2 close submission attempts by Brian Ortega. The one most people remember is the mounted guillotine where Volkanovski kind of slipped and Brian Ortega snatched up that guillotine so quick, had a mounted guillotine, and somehow Volkanovski fought out of it. Then I think Brian Ortega almost had a triangle, but then Volkanovski just proceeded to ground and pound Brian Ortega so badly, busted him up so badly. I was actually thinking the doctor should have stopped that one, or the corner should have stopped that one. That was another masterful performance by Alexander Volkanovski. The fight before that was the second Max Holloway fight. Now, the second Max Holloway fight back at UFC 251 was razor close. I gave it to Alexander Volkanovski, but this one was super close. And then the fight before that was back at UFC 245 when he won the featherweight title, defeating Max Holloway in the first fight. I thought this was a clear win for Alexander Volkanovski. I did not see any controversy in the first fight. And, Volkanovski went out there and put on a very good performance. Was it as dominant as the trilogy? No, it was not. But it was still a very good performance, and I thought he clearly won. And just a couple other names on Alexander Volkanovski's resume. A win over Jose Aldo, one of the greatest of all time in the featherweight division. And then also a win over Chad Mendes, who was still elite at the time that Volkanovski beat him. And this was back in December of 2018, and he TKO'd Chad Mendes. So incredible wins for Volkanovski, one of the greatest resumes I've ever seen. Moving over to Islam Makhachev. Of his 23 wins, 4 by knockout, 11 by submission, 8 by decision. His last fight was at UFC 280 October of 2022, where he dismantled Charles Oliveira. And what was so shocking about this performance is he just dominated in all facets. He dominated in the clinch. He dominated on the ground. He eventually submitted Charles Oliveira in the second round with an arm triangle, and he submitted him because he dropped him and rocked him badly on the feet. So Islam Makhachev just looked incredible in this fight. And watching it back, it was even more of an awesome display of elite level skill sets because Charles Oliveira came out with some heavy pressure. And Makhachev set the tone, landing some nasty combinations on Charles Oliveira. And the striking of Islam Makhachev, myself going into UFC 280, I underrated it. It looks incredible. And every time out, I think Islam Makhachev, his skill set has improved, and that's something I always look for in guys that I think will be future champions or guys that I think will stick around at the top for a while. But that was an amazing performance against a guy the level of Charles Oliveira. Islam Makhachev went out there and dominated him. Now, when you start to look at the rest of his resume, it leaves a lot to be desired. You have a short notice win over Bobby Green, doesn't mean much. You have a short notice win over Dan Hooker, it doesn't mean much. You have a submission win over Thiago Moises. I think Thiago Moises at the time was criminally underrated, but still people are going to say, it took him 4 rounds to finish Thiago Moises. He's not even ranked anymore. And that's back in July of 2021, so it's not that long ago. A win over Drew Dober. And then you start looking through this resume, it's just not the greatest names. I mean, he has a win over Arman Tsarukyan, but this was, I believe it was Tsarukyan's debut, and it was short notice, and it was all the way back in 2019. So it doesn't mean much as you think it would mean, even though I still think it does mean something considering where Tsarukyan is nowadays and considering that wasn't that long ago. But a lot of people are going to pick apart this 11-fight win streak. But I think you look at these wins, and I've said this for a long time, you look at these wins, they were all super dominant. And on top of that, it doesn't matter the level of competition all those were. Look what he did to Charles Oliveira. We know how good Charles Oliveira is. Look what he did to Michael Chandler. Look what he did to Justin Gaethje. Look what he did to Dustin Poirier. Charles Oliveira has been around for a long time, and look what Islam Makhachev did to him. So I think regardless of the quality of the win streak, I think Islam Makhachev has more than proved that he is the elite of the elite at lightweight. So when I look at this fight, I see a very interesting matchup because Islam Makhachev, before the Charles Oliveira fight, I would have said, if he doesn't get this fight to the ground, he's in real trouble. To quote Joe Rogan, every time there's even remotely a submission attempt, yeah, he's in real trouble. But after seeing Makhachev striking against Charles Oliveira, I know Charles Oliveira is no Volkanovski on the feet, but I think Islam Makhachev can hang in there with Volkanovski on the feet. I do think Volkanovski has a slight advantage. I do think Volkanovski throws more of a variety of attack. I do think Volkanovski has a little bit better footwork. And I just think that this is a fight where we know what Islam Makhachev is going to try to do. But if it stays on the feet, I don't think you can count Islam Makhachev completely out. But I do think if Makhachev is able to get Alexander Volkanovski on the ground and control him for extended periods of time, I do think that it's not going to favor well for Alexander Volkanovski. If he gets taken down, and even if he gets up after 2.5 minutes, I don't think Volkanovski, as good as Makhachev is and his determination to get these takedowns, I don't think that Alexander Volkanovski can compete with that if he's not able to stuff the takedowns. And I think this is a fight where if I see Volkanovski, I don't want to completely count out Alexander Volkanovski in this fight. I think he can very well win this fight. He is so good. He has elite level fight IQ. He has great footwork. He has very technical striking. He has decent power. He doesn't have nuclear power. I believe if Volkanovski wins this fight, I believe he wins via decision in a close fight where he stuffs some takedowns, maybe gets taken down for a little bit, but pops back to his feet. But I just don't think that's super likely. I think if Islam Makhachev wins this fight, I think his most likely path to victory is probably submission, followed by decision, followed by KO or TKO. I think it's highly unlikely Islam Makhachev gets the TKO in this fight. And that's why my official prediction for this fight is going to be Islam Makhachev via 4th round submission. I am going to go with an arm triangle for Islam Makhachev. I just think Volkanovski is going to be undersized. And I think there's going to be moments where Volkanovski's landing some good shots on the feet. But I think Islam's grappling, his trips, his sweeps, his takedowns are just so good. And I think Volkanovski can only fend him off for so long. And I think even if Volkanovski's able to stuff the takedowns, I think Makhachev's just going to be wearing on him in the clinch. Knees to the body in the clinch. I mean, Charles Oliveira has some of the best clinch work I have ever seen. And Islam Makhachev was doing very good in the clinch with Charles Oliveira, landing good knees to the body. And I just think the way this fight will probably go, it'll start off pretty competitive. I think Volkanovski is going to be kind of circling around. I think Islam Makhachev is going to be pressuring him, looking for the takedown. And I think early on, Volkanovski will be able to stuff some of these takedowns. And I think that's what Volkanovski is preparing for. I think he knows that Islam Makhachev wants to come out and take him down. But I think Makhachev's striking is just good enough where it's not like he's going to be Damian Maia shooting on desperation takedowns. I think he will be able to use some of the striking. And I think the threat of the takedown from Makhachev will open up some of the striking for Makhachev. Even though we all know that Volkanovski is a better striker, I think there's going to be moments in this fight where Makhachev lands some good shots because Volkanovski is so worried about the takedown. And Makhachev's striking has evolved. He has good hands. He's even mixing in kicks quite a bit now. And I just think in this fight, Islam Makhachev has become so well-rounded. I think he's bigger. I think he's stronger. I think he has better wrestling. I think he has better jiu-jitsu. And I think over the course of the first 3 rounds, it's going to be a mix of Islam Makhachev pushing Alexander Volkanovski up against the fence, getting some control time, landing some knees to the body, some dirty boxing. I think he'll have a little bit of success on the feet. And I think basically what you're going to see is you're going to see it start off competitively, and then it's just going to slowly start creeping in the favor of Islam Makhachev as he gets 30 seconds of control time against the fence, as he gets a takedown and holds Volkanovski down for a minute and a half. I don't think Volkanovski is going to fade, but I just think Islam Makhachev is just going to get more and more comfortable. And I think eventually, come the 4th round, Volkanovski, instead of being at 100% stamina, he's going to be at 90% because he's still going to be pretty fresh. We've seen the level of cardio that Volkanovski has. But I think Makhachev will have weared on him quite a bit for the first 3 rounds. And I think after, landing some good shots, so land some shots on the ground and pound for Islam Makhachev. It'll never be super brutal. I don't think Makhachev's going to finish Volkanovski with ground and pound. But I don't know. The ground and pound he showed against Charles Oliveira was hellacious. What he did to Bobby Green was nasty. I think there is a chance that Makhachev could come out here and dominate this fight. But I see this being a grueling competitive fight where eventually Makhachev, with his determination, with his wrestling, with his jiu-jitsu, eventually kind of wears on Volkanovski, beats him up a little bit. The fight's going his way. Eventually, he gets him down in that 4th round and works an arm triangle and submits Alexander Volkanovski to retain his lightweight title. But I think definitely that Volkanovski has a legitimate chance to defeat Islam Makhachev. He's just so well-rounded. And, he is shorter. He's mentioned, I'm shorter. I got the low center of gravity. I can stuff these takedowns. If he can stuff the takedowns enough where he's comfortable to land on the feet, I could see Volkanovski taking a decision. Maybe winning like 3 rounds to 2 where Makhachev gets some control time and ekes out rounds. But I just don't think it's super likely. I think Makhachev is going to be too big, too strong. And Volkanovski, I know he was the backup for the UFC 280 fight. But I would have liked this if Volkanovski had like a 6-8 month period to really put on size for this fight. And, the fight just happened in October. I don't think Volkanovski is going to be a whole lot bigger than he was in his last fight. And I just think the featherweight weight class is the perfect division for Volkanovski. And I just think he's going to be outmatched against Islam Makhachev in just physicality and strength and grappling. So I think Islam Makhachev, 4th round arm triangle submission. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. And thank you so much for watching.